Um, Whoever has the slides that sent to me, I've embedded them in the presentation. If one of the speakers has no slides, so please feel free to speak. I will share my screen now. Sorry for that. Can you see my presentation, please? Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. This webinar is hosted by Work Package 4 of No Fear project, which is a project funded by European Commission under Horizon 2020 program. The main objective of this project, for those of you who are not familiar, is to create a network of practitioners of emergency medical systems and basically bring the academia, suppliers, and the end users in a closer relationship while bridging the gaps. The current webinar will deal with the challenges in the medical device regulation, which is needed for medical device registration in EU. Basically, for those companies that produce medical device, they need to be registered in the MDR in order to be able to sell. The current changes in the MDR bring new challenges for us and for the end users, and those we would like to discuss in this webinar. So we spoke about the challenges, and we will host presentations from industry, the regulation, and the end users with inputs from distributors. And after that, we will host a brainstorming session in which we will be happy for your inputs, of course. I will speak about the clinical aspect of the challenges. Shifra, who is our regulatory manager, will speak about the regulatory issues. Anders is a distributor, speak from his perspective. Dario and Tomer are EMS, Emergency Medical Services representatives in this webinar, and we'll be happy to hear their input, of course. Thank you, all the speakers who really made it in this short notice. So speaking about the clinical aspect, medical device companies who would like to continue selling their devices across Europe, or starting their sales in European Union, will be required to constantly monitor the device performance. They may be needed to provide outputs of data collected about the clinical performance of the device. So it's basically failures, success, etc., which is not always possible to do nowadays. The medical device companies will be also required to provide clinical studies that are actually prove the product efficiency. Otherwise, the distribution of the product may be halted. And we speak about clinical studies that may be retrospective, or prospective, or comparative. from all kinds. As something that we do in the medical device industry is usability tests. So when the device is under the development phase, we need to constantly test it with the end users, and for that we obviously need end users cooperation, which is not always acceptable. Not the end users are not always into that cooperation. And this is definitely a challenge which we will need to overcome as a medical device company. We will have more and more data collection requests, which is basically a typical questionnaire that we will distribute to the end users, and we will have to get the responses back. And Shifra will elaborate more about that, but of course we will need both sides to be comparative on this. Otherwise this may disqualify the medical device registration. So we all know that, and it's a fact, but it needs to be said that end users in the emergency medicine field, they want to do their job. They want to go out to do the calls, to save lives, and sometimes the cooperation with money-driven industry. And at the end of the day, medical device industry is a money-driven industry. We need to be profitable to operate. It's not always welcomed by regulations of the emergency medical service or the hospital, or just because of the behavioral, they just do it on a daily basis. But in the current MDR, it may be needed for both sides to succeed. So basically, we as a medical device company, we will need it to produce more devices and better devices. And the end users will need it to have those devices on time. So this will be all from my side. And I kindly give the mic to Shifra.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Just mark when you need me to go to the next slide.
All right, thank you. Hi. I'm the Quality Assurance and Regulatory Affairs Manager here at PerSys Medical, and thank you, Eddie, for your presentation and introduction. My presentation is going to be on the MDR co-dependency, and I
can't hear you very well, Shilpa. Sorry.
Right?
Can't hear you either.
No, wait. Sorry, maybe my information is not. Is this better? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but the sound is bad. Maybe try to switch to your headphones.
Can you hear me now? Is this better now?
No, not really.
Yeah.
Not very well.
Is this better now?
Slightly.
Eddie, perhaps.
It's slightly better, but not. Okay.
So, can you hear me now?
Now it's
Yes. All right. Good. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So you can hear me now, correct? Sorry, just the definition was not the right one. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the MDR codependency between the players in the industry. All right. Eddie, you can Thanks. Okay. So moving from the MDD, which is the medical device directive, to the MDR, which is the medical device regulation, just to give people that are not into the regulatory field just a point of view. The MDD was 60 pages long, and the MDR is 228 pages long. It's almost ×4. And this is not including additional medical device coordination group, the MDCG guidances. So the regulatory documentation and the regulatory burden has become much larger for all parties involved. I wanted this point to mention and to remember that the regulation goal is to bring a safe and effective device to the market. So the device needs to be safe and effective, and that's why we have the requirements, but it also needs to actually get to the market. So we need to be able to bring it to the market and meet all the regulatory expectations. Eddie? Thanks. Okay, so I'm just gonna touch a few of the differences between the MDD and the MDR. Obviously, anyone that is familiar with MDR knows that there's much more, as I explained earlier, but this is what I want to touch. The role and the requirements of the economic operators are defined, and the economic operators are the manufacturer, the importer, the distributor, and the authorized representative. It's important to note that existing products must recertify. So let's say we have products, PerSys Medical has products that have been certified under MDD. We need to recertify them under MDR. We are now at a transition point. There's a transition time until the end of the CE certificate, but we will need to be recertified under MDR. Manufacturers need to generate and provide more in-depth clinical data. So that touches on what Eddie discussed before. There is something that's called UDI, which is unique device identification, which is something regarding traceability, and that's on the labeling of the device that manufacturers and distributors and importers need to address. The whole subject of vigilance, which is incident or malfunction reporting by end users to the distributors and the manufacturers. The reporting time of manufacturers has been shortened for some of the incidents from 30 days to 15 days. So if we're talking about the time frame in which we need to respond, it was cut by half. The subject of post-market surveillance. Post-market surveillance is all the data that is gathered by end users and distributors on what's going on with the device in the market. I think Eddie discussed that as well a bit. And also the clinical evaluation post-market. Okay, now, sorry. We are required, there's a new subject, post-market clinical follow-up, which is basically manufacturers are required to get clinical information on products that are already in the field and to update this information constantly, depending on the class grade of the device. Eddie? Okay. So I want to discuss the interfaces. As I just said earlier, I'm going to discuss the codependencies. So we have two main interfaces from my point of view, from the manufacturer's point of view. One of the interfaces is the interface with the distributor or the importer. Now, we need to assure that the other side, the distributor and the importer is compliant with the MDR. So we need to make sure that they have traceability in place, that they have UDI in place, that they have the post-marketing surveillance and vigilance system in place, and etc. And what's important to note is this interface is regulated. The requirements are implemented in the regulation for both sides of this interface, both to the manufacturer and the distributor importer, both need to comply with this regulation. Eddie? Another interface is the interface of the manufacturer and the end user. As Eddie detailed before, we need to get information from the end user to be compliant ourselves. We need to get post-marketing surveillance information. We need to get the vigilance information. That means specifically that we need end users to report on what's going on if there's an incident, and to give data that we can actually use when we report to the competent authority. I think that this, from my end of the rope, and we sometimes don't get all of the data. Eddie, if I'm allowed to say that you got a bag with a product saying Eddie with a malfunction product was left in his in MADA, and we had to understand what happened with this product to understand whether we need to report it, we don't need to report it. And of course, again, the clinical data that we need to get about the usability of the product, malfunctions that we get, how we can get better performance, what the user needs are. And this interface is not regulated. The requirements are only for the manufacturer, but the requirements as the end user is not regulated. There is a bit of a problem here from our point of view, from the manufacturer's point of view, because Eddie, my point is in the next slide. Okay, there's an industry gap because there's because the existence of the product in the market, hence the certification under MDR, partially relies on data from the end user, and the MDR has a structural blind spot to this relationship. Eddie? So the solution approach, and what I think that would be interesting to discuss here with all parties involved, I would suggest a systematic implementation to facilitate a feedback loop that is required for the information flow. Hence, to have something that's systematic, because right now the manufacturer, we give training to the distributor gives training to the end user, whether it's usually it's a system, but that system not necessarily has the feedback loop implemented in that system. So let's say if we have procedures that dictate how we act and to comply with the regulatory requirements, I would like to see, I suggest to see that systematic approach in the end users of our products as well. I would also suggest to have a regulatory frameworks, including the end user requirements. And of course, this can bring to a successful active cooperation of all sides. And coming back to my first slide, bringing to the market a safe and effective device. So we all want to have this, and the manufacturer needs the end user's input to be able to do that. Thank you all.
Thank you, Shifra. I think that many of the organizations that work in the emergency medicine field, I think from all sides of this triangle of distributor, manufacturer, and end users, we need to think about those specialists who actually deal with this specific regulation part, which is most of us don't really like to deal with, and this is really a thing. I think Anders will speak about now about his challenges in the distribution side, and we really see that we need to invest in this specific aspect in order not to lose more money at the end of the day, and in order to fulfill all the needed orders for those who are out there in the field. So I give the floor to Mr. Thomason. Your slides are here. Just ask me to move them.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
we are, of course, both a manufacturer, importer, and distributor, depending on which markets we are looking at. But if you go to the next slide, of course, we are almost all our products are risk class 1, so we don't have the heavy bureaucracy of all the 228 pages referred to, but still we have met a lot of challenges in the market. Both challenges for us as a manufacturer, as a small and medium-sized company, but most of our challenges we have met out in the market with the purchasing end. We are basically dealing with pre-hospital equipment, emergency equipment out in the field, assisting the blue light personnel, whether that is ambulance services or civil defense, to handle large incidents with many patients. That is our business as we deal with. So if we go to the next slide, we have been through our own products and classified them and tried to document according to the new regulations. But we receive a lot of conflicting advice from the so-called experts on the MDR. Whether our products are a medical device or not. So if you look at the bottom, I just put up 3 examples from our catalog. We sell emergency stretchers, and of course they are meant to be used for patients. It's quite easy to agree that that is a medical device. It's risk class 1, so it's not a heavy burden. But if we go to the wool blanket, I have had hospital clients, well, that is to say, hospital purchasing personnel refusing to buy the wool blanket because it is not registered and documented according to the MDR. And that is where we have a good laugh and a good cup of coffee in the office and ask ourselves what is happening. And we see there is a lot of misunderstanding and confusion within the whole medical environment. We meet that first of all on the purchasing responsibles. They have gotten instructions from their hospital or their pre-hospital unit that they have to check that every single product they purchase is registered according to the new regulations. Sometimes we feel they even demand that pencils used for writing prescriptions need to be registered in the MDR, to be on the joking side. But if you look at the product in between, it's a triage marking set for the first triage in a mass casualty incident out in the field. And this is one of the products where we are having most of the conflicting answers from the experts, whether that is a medical device or not. So this is, I'm not arguing that a product should be or should not be a medical device. My point is, it's quite hard to orientate ourselves among expert advice, among the customers and how they are interpreting the new regulations. So my key point is that it's a pretty high level of confusions out in the market. And we are meeting it on a daily basis right now. So that is one important thing that I hope there will be coming better and better guidelines. And probably industry meetings like this is one thing that can lead to a better understanding on the different levels on how to interpret the regulations. So if you go to the next slide, distribution of products, which is half our business, where we purchase products from all over the world. And we see that the high level of confusion in Europe, it doubles when we go to Asian manufacturers or American manufacturers. And they don't have a clue, and they haven't been following the process closely, many of the smaller manufacturers. The big ones, of course, they have the radar on and so forth. But there are a lot of producers of excellent equipment that do not really understand what is going on in Europe and do not understand that they have to step up and carry some costs and get better testing of their products and better documentation. So this is another area where we are spending an awful lot of time in guiding our suppliers to understand the regulations. And of course, this is certainly driving costs up for several of the products, which is another consequence that we see from it. So that is the key experiences that we see in the market. But of course, we are a small niche operator. And it is very interesting to listen to all the other experiences that you are making or getting in the market. So I appreciate having the opportunity to share some thoughts with you. Yeah, here I just concluded that most of our products fall in risk class 1. So and we really needed the extra year that we got in order to prepare our own documentation, and not to speak about the documentation of the products we distribute. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Anders. This is another point of view for those of us who still don't understand the sizes, the scale of the challenge, of how we call it, but still it's something that needs to be addressed, of course, in an immediate way. And I think this is a great idea to perform those industry meetings to create more awareness and more buzz about the challenges, and maybe share data. So definitely yes. Now we spoke a lot about the commercial companies, and now it's time to give the floor for those who are out there at the field. And Dario Gonzalez is our next speaker. So
hi. Okay, you hear me okay?
Yes, you don't have slides, right?
No, no slides, I just talk. And so I really want to comment on some of the issues that were brought up, and the understanding from what is our position when we talk about equipment and providing some of that information. I think for us, and for me in particular, I am not astute enough as Schiffer was on all the regulations, but the understanding from us and with, and I really want to comment, is that any device, anything that makes contact with a patient, anything that assists us in managing a patient is considered a patient care device. It really doesn't matter, and that includes a blanket, and that includes our burn blankets. So it's very different. We don't include pencils there because we don't give those to patients. And even some of the equipment that we have that's in close contact with patients. So I think there needs to be, and I would agree, there probably needs to be a better clarification on what standards should be applied, what testing should be applied. I can tell you that oftentimes with the manufacturers is they give us incomplete information. We often find out afterwards that there are issues with their equipment. I was involved in one ventilator evaluation with a company. Since my reviews were not very good or considered very acceptable, that sort of ended that relationship. And so I find that what we do is we find out issues usually afterwards. We do not routinely, and I think it would not be a bad idea, have in advance when we do purchase equipment, when we do test equipment, that there be an agreement between the manufacturer and our agency, and that would be the fire department. We do not have that at present that I know of. What our communication back to the industry is when there is an issue with equipment, when there are multiple failures with equipment, when we need to pull equipment. I don't think it would be a bad idea is to monitor that and track it as almost a quality assurance issue as to what goes on with equipment, what are some of the failings, what are some of the good things on. One of the things we do find is that we have issues with interface that we usually find out about it later on, in particular when we want to interface our electronics and our EKG transmissions, that manufacturers say, oh, just do an add-on and you can do this. And again, that was something that burned us, which really has made it very, very difficult for us to move forward with that company and just shift the company completely. We tend to, as the Americans do, just go 180 out. We don't tend to adjust and change things. We tend to really cycle things out. So I think the comments are good in doing it. And the best comment I like and what was just presented was, what about from the beginning if we establish a process of feedback going forward, and then we can evaluate and adjust equipment. But we like the manufacturer to commit to modifications and corrections as we find them. We tried a electronic triage system that sounded good. We tried it, it was good. It was terrible. It did not work at all. Again, that's the problem. Maybe it's a problem with the end user. I don't know. But that would have been good to early on to go back and have a meeting to see if there was some sort of correction, some modification, or in fact, was it the way we were using the product that really resulted in a perceived failure, if that was a failure. And I think that's one of the things we need to do. The other thing is, I think from the pre-hospital setting, just to throw this in, is that we often find that what people bring, the manufacturers bring to the pre-hospital setting is just a hospital device that they sort of put together, add a few bells and whistles and say, this is for pre-hospital. And I think they need to look at that a little bit closer because that always becomes an issue with us. But I think that, some of those suggestions are very good, and I would move forward from there. And in particular, the one I would really champion is this setting up in advance, in the beginning, some sort of feedback mechanism before we have a failure, because it leads to other issues later on with other purchases and our fear of using equipment. The other thing is the U.S. is very litigious. Everybody loves to sue for everything. So we are very, very careful in what we buy. And our definition of patient care device is anything, essentially anything that comes in contact with a patient or results in the care of the patient. Okay, and that's really all I have at this point in time.
Thank you very much, Lionel. And Tomer, I think it will be your turn now to speak as EMS person, but also you are involved in the ISO procedures in MDA. So I guess you could elaborate more on the applications from commercial companies when they come on board.
Yeah. So as we had a pre-talk this week, me and you, regarding this issue. But as we discussed, so first of all, it's important to state that it's not something new. If you look at the ISO standard 9001/2015, you can see several sections that deal with customer satisfaction, with the estimation of the product by the customer, and it goes bilateral. So since we are also holding the ISO standard 9001-2015, we are also obligated to do, as part of the quality assurance, satisfactions, how do you call it? Customer satisfaction surveys to products that provided to us by external providers. But if you look at the standard, you can see sections 8.2, which deals with these issues, 9.1, 9.12, 9.13, 9.3.2, if I remember. So all of these sections deal with actually the things we're discussing now. We tried to do several surveys like that in the past within our organization regarding external providers to provide feedback to the providers. And this is also something we discussed. So what we found, and it's something that needs to be addressed, is that usually you get a report bias, because what you get is the two ends of the spectrum. You get the ones that are really happy with the product and say good things about it, and you get the ones that are really unhappy with the product and have a lot of bad things to it. So it's a bias that needs to be corrected somehow. Usually people who don't really care or are satisfied in a way with the product, you don't get the responses. So it's something that needs to be corrected. Another thing that needs to be addressed, that we have, I don't know, I think 100 of providers. So if you have an overflow of surveys and assessments, I don't think you're going to get real responses. So it's something I think that needs to be addressed in a larger aspect, and not in the smaller company aspect. What we discussed, and might be a good solution, at least for some products, and I discussed it with Eddie also this week, is that if on your product you put a way, it could be a QR code that sends because everybody is holding a phone today, a smartphone. So even if you have a QR code on your product, and it says, once you use the product, go to the QR code and give us your opinion about it. Even if you don't get a large amount of responses, you're still going to get probably an honest one. I think it's a way that could help. Regarding the vigilance, I think it's something that actually it usually flows up. Maybe one device or the other will be left with a note saying for Eddie, but usually it's something that will be brought up and checked. It's not something that's the customer will never leave something like that behind without addressing it. And I think, and regarding the how can you enforce it on the companies, and I don't know if you can even enforce it on the end users. But I think, again, I think if the product, if it's how do you say it, something that's easy to address, like a QR code or something that you create a connection, and you need to do it continuously. It's not something that you can do once when you sign the agreement. Then I think it will be more beneficial. And that's it from my side.
Thank you, Tomer. So I think that kind of moves us smoothly to the brainstorming session. And my first question will be for Tomer and Dario, I guess. So I definitely understand the customer satisfaction survey, which is relatively easy to perform, and it's relatively it's also, I guess, it's legal in all its aspects, but whatever may interest the MDR, which is for Israel, it's much less relevant, but for Europe it is. It's the actual clinical input or output from the end user. So basically, and these medical device companies cannot just collect. We understand that this is not legal, and we need all the ethical approvals for that. So, is there any coherent way to create an interest on the side of EMS and hospitals, ERs, to cooperate with those studies that we initiate, but on the other hand, for us not to fund those studies, because we all know that if we pay for the study, it's worth as much as a paper which it's written on. So if you have any ideas, that would be a great time to mention them.
I'll just jump in first. I think it's a good idea, but we're very, very cautious, as you sort of allude to, the issue of patient confidentiality and doing studies with patients and equipment is something really very hard for us to do, because they have to go to review boards and there are all sorts of checks and balances on it. But if you look at designing something from the beginning that's essentially a depersonalized study and doesn't really have any patient identification in it, and you look at very specific issues related with a device. Does it work? Does it not work? Failure rates, things like that, that might be helpful to be able to at least get some feedback. And again, I agree. And use people that use the device either like it or don't like it. And oftentimes it's not based on whether it works or not. It's some other factors, Does the monitor work? Well, it's too heavy. Does the chair work? Well, it doesn't. It's too heavy. If it's lighter, then it works. So we've run into this. And so we use that, but we don't rely on that completely. We're really looking at failure rates of equipment and issues with devices. So yeah, I think it is possible to do that in a sense, almost a blinded study to try and get that information, but that's something that should really be negotiated at the beginning. And that could be part of just a quality assurance process. So that may be what an agency does anyway. So when you look at the cost of it, it's really borne by what normal activities are. But remember, we live very closely under HIPAA, which really stifles us in many ways.
Yeah, I see that, Dario. So I will try to make it a little bit harder and a little bit more realistic, and say, so if a company like us and others, we cooperate and we approach you and we say, hey, Mr. Gonzalez, we have a new type of a triage tag which we developed, and we would like a clinical study on that. But on the other hand, we don't want to pay for it. What would be your response?
Thank you very much. We'll look at it and go from there. I think if we were looking at it seriously of using it and it was brought up to deal with an issue, then I think that would be different versus bringing in something and saying, try this and see how it works and let us know. I think that can become problematic, but we have done studies on equipment, on different devices for intubation, which we worked with the manufacturer on, and I've gone from there. And I don't know the details of it, but it's really a joint study that was utilized. And oftentimes that has to deal with what's a deficiency in something or what's a new mode of management that would be very beneficial for the patient or for the service, or use different devices for hypothermia. And things like that, which we were looking at a clinical issue and a problem, and now we have a device that may in fact be part of resolution of that problem versus just checking a device for somebody else. And then again, it's going to be the issue of how do we use it appropriately, and does it require patient consent? Doesn't it require patient consent? As part of a standardized patient management. Those get very complicated. And so the answer is probably yes and no. It will depend.
Yeah.
Eddie.
Yes.
Something you can do as a manufacturer, and I guess it depends how big you are and what area of the world you work in. But I assume you can find a an objective researcher from the academia, which usually, especially in the health field, is connected to a hospital. And in that way, you are not addressing neither of the sides, not the hospital or the end user, but the academia is in the hospital, so usually they have access to the data. And then you can get objective, especially if you're not the only, and I guess that works to your benefit. If you're not the only one, the only manufacturer in the market, and then if you know there's an area that you are mostly working in, and then you have an academia in that area, so you can relate the results to your products in a way, I assume. So that could be a solution.
Yes, this is definitely a very effective solution to just approach those people who actually want to write scientific papers and interest them in our field. Just for everyone in the webinar, it's a challenge for us to be on the thin line between funding those articles and just being a passive partner. It's always a challenge, and I think we need to be credible and very transparent when dealing with those kind of studies. This will eventually bring the success, I guess. If any other partner would like to elaborate from the end users or.
Hello, this is Sabina. My camera is not working. Hello. We belong to the academia, as you know. Every time they've asked us to try devices, it's already that the product is already made and they want from us to say that it's good, basically. So when you're saying that if we have, these articles we are sometimes publishing, they have to be positive, because they pay us and they give us the devices, etc. But on the other hand, if they asked us, what could we make better with this device? At least in Europe, there is the problem. They would have to start everything from scratch again, because all the certification is done. To change a medical device is something that takes a lot of money from the industry. So in a way, even if we do suggest a modification, they are not able to uptake it because it is too costly. I think this is one of the problems.
Yes, definitely understand that. I think in our study that we conduct now with MDA, I think the first sentence in our meeting was that we would like to hear the results, whatever they are, and I think this kind of advanced it to the right direction. But definitely, I think a medical device company which is not sure if their product is good, maybe they need to consider to make it better before they go to the academia. But definitely, I totally agree, Sabina.
And you have to add that it's not only we will hear the results, whatever they are, we're going to publish the results, whatever they are.
Yep.
So it's something that you need to take into account.
Definitely so. Anybody else? Okay. At this point, I will thank all the participants. It's really great that you made it in really short notice, and we will distribute the slides with your permission, and we will send the link to the video for those who are not here or joined late today. Just a reminder for another call that we have in 7 minutes with Itamar. So please do and connect to it. That will be all, and I will wish you a safe weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. See you.